Okay, so you want to really get a handle on something complex, but without drowning in information overload, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the goal here.
Well, that's exactly what we try to do. Today, we're diving deep into, well, unsolved mysteries, and how time, new evidence, even just changing how we look at things can totally reshape how we understand the past.
Exactly. And we've pulled together quite a range of sources, some news reports on, cold cases that finally got solved with new forensics.
Right.
And also some historical texts that give us that broader context, socially, politically, for stuff that happened ages ago.
So our mission today, if you like, is to explore how time passing, plus, new tech and shifts in how society thinks, how all that really changes our read on the past. We've got specific examples, crime investigations, historical interpretations, the whole lot.
So maybe start with the crime stuff, those cases that seemed impossible to solve for so long.
Yeah, let's do that. It really shows how science can just, well, light up the dark corners.
Okay, take the Golden State Killer, that crime spree, 1974 to 86. Terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. And for years, nothing. It just hung there, a real symbol of investigative limits back then.
But then things changed. Big time. DNA tech got better, and people started using public genealogy databases in this really clever way.
That's the fascinating part, isn't it? They took DNA from crime scenes, and sometimes it was from tiny things like discarded razors, napkins.
Stuff you wouldn't even think about.
Right. And they used it to find distant relatives in those public databases.
It's like working a family tree backwards. A huge one. And that path, eventually, it led them to Joseph James D'Angelo, arrested in 2018.
And the media played a role too, right? Like that HBO series, I'll Be Gone in the Dark.
Yeah, that definitely brought it back into the spotlight just before the arrest. And The Guardian covered it extensively too, leading up to the sentencing in 2020.
The scale is just mind-boggling. 13 murders, over 50 sexual assaults, 120 burglaries.
It's staggering. It really shows how connecting dots, maybe seemingly unrelated dots, with new tools, it can crack almost anything.
And you see something similar, though maybe a different tech angle, with George and Catherine Peacock, murdered back in '89.
Oh, that was a brutal one. An older couple, 76 and 73, stabbed and no forced entry.
Which immediately makes you think, okay, they probably knew the killer.
Right. The son-in-law, Michael Louise, he was a suspect early on. But they just didn't have the hard proof for years.
But then, fast forward, 33 years?
Yeah, quite a gap. And this is where those dedicated cold case units, plus the forensic improvements, really shine. May 2020, they look again at the old evidence, tests, on a blood sample from Louise's car, and boom, a DNA match to George Peacock.
Wow. After all that time.
Science finally gave them the answer. Louise was arrested in 2022. It just shows, evidence that seemed useless back then.
Can become the key later on?
Exactly. Gives closure, finally, to those families. So it's not just that technology solves crimes, it's that what we even consider solvable evidence keeps changing. Things become clearer.
Definitely makes you rethink old assumptions. And then there's Susan Berman, murdered in 2000. That one wasn't just forensics, was it?
No, not entirely. Witness testimony was huge there, and it was really pushed forward by that documentary, The Jinx, connecting Robert Durst.
Right. So sometimes it's not a microscope. It's a new story, a new perspective that makes someone talk.
Exactly. It shows how the past can kind of bubble up in different ways.
It's interesting, too, how these cases really showcase careers like, forensic investigator, DNA analyst.
Forensic genealogist, that's a newer one, too.
Yeah.
There are actual university programs for this stuff now.
Yeah. And it touches on that other idea we talked about, citizen sleuths, true crime. Does that crowdsource justice? It's a whole other layer, the cultural side of it. But okay, let's shift gears a bit. Because it's not just crime scenes where the past gets reevaluated. History itself, our understanding of it, is always in flux.
That's a great point. Just like new evidence can change a verdict, new viewpoints, different social contexts, they can completely change how we understand big historical moments.
And for this part, we're looking at Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which, really shook things up by focusing on ordinary folks, marginalized groups, the voices usually left out.
Yeah, Zinn really digs into things like class tensions, even during something like the American Revolution, which we often think of as, everyone united against the British.
But it wasn't that simple.
Not at all. Zinn points to things like mobs destroying rich people's houses in Boston. That suggests, resentment that went deeper than just hating British taxes.
And it wasn't just Boston, right? There was that piece in the New York Gazette questioning if it was fair for some people to have so much wealth.
Right, and you had mechanics, skilled workers, artisans, basically, and other regular people in cities making demands, not just for independence, but for real democracy.
Like what specifically?
Things like open town meetings, public galleries and legislatures, publishing votes, fairer taxes, price controls, even wanting ordinary people like them, representing them.
So a much broader vision than just kicking the British out.
Definitely. Zinn talks about Philadelphia in 1776, where some laborers were openly hostile to, like, concentrated wealth, unlimited private property. There was even a committee, the Privates Committee, warning against great and overgrown rich men.
Wow. That's pretty radical for the time.
And it wasn't just cities. Zinn describes tenant riots in places like New Jersey, New York, organized movements against rich landlords. They weren't just random outbursts, they had goals. Sometimes they even set up their own local governance.
So if you connect those dots, the revolution wasn't just about Britain. It was also this internal struggle over money and power.
Absolutely. And Zinn sheds light on other areas too, like the early struggles of women in the 19th century, often overlooked.
Those factory tracks he mentions, calling mill women slaves, that's harsh.
Yeah, it paints a grim picture. But what's also important is how these women started organizing, having mass meetings. There's this report from the New York Sun about young women asking men not to come to their meetings so they could figure things out themselves.
Taking charge.
Yeah, even though some papers, like the New York Herald, were pretty dismissive, it shows this growing sense of solidarity, a shared identity. They wanted their voices heard.
And you see that shared experience, whether it was in the home or the factory, kind of building that common ground. It's interesting, too, how middle-class women started getting involved, becoming teachers, getting more educated, pushing for reforms.
Yeah, health reforms.
Yeah.
Challenging sexual double standards, abolition. And it highlights that shift in values. Think about Thomas Jefferson's view on women's education, mostly superficial stuff, right?
Right.
Compare that to Emma Willard, who was arguing for real substantive learning for women so they could contribute more broadly. That's a big shift in thinking about women's potential.
It really is. And Zinn, well, he doesn't pull punches on the tougher parts of American history either, like Indian removal.
No, he forces you to confront it. The relentless push west, the demand for land, and the brutal reality of forcing Native Americans off their ancestral homes. The statistics he uses, just devastating drops in population east of the Mississippi. The human cost is enormous.
And it's jarring to see how, even though early on people like Knox, even Jefferson, sort of acknowledged Indian land rights,
the pressure from settlers just became overwhelming. Jefferson himself later pushed for removal, even suggesting ways to get tribes into debt so they'd have to give up land. It shows how priorities shifted.
And the treaties, often based on fraud, coercion, breaking up tribal lands. That quote from the Georgia banker, "Stealing is the order of the day." This is it all, really.
It does. And the words of Speckled Snake, the Creek elder reacting to Andrew Jackson's policy, his metaphor about the white man starting small and then growing so big he crushes them, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Dale Van Every, another historian Zinn cites, talks about the deep emotional and cultural damage. It wasn't just losing land, it was destroying a whole way of life, their identity.
Moving on in time, Zinn also tackles the post-Civil War South, another period that often gets, well, romanticized, but was filled with injustice.
He includes some really ugly stuff, derogatory portrayals in literature, even Uncle Remus saying black people shouldn't be educated.
And you have Booker T. Washington urging political quietness, focusing on vocational skills.
Which, maybe seemed pragmatic given the intense violence. But then contrast that with Thomas Fortune's testimony, widespread poverty, the exploitative order system where people were paid in store credit, the horrors of the convict lease system.
It paints a very different picture. And thousands of black people actually fled to Kansas to escape it all. They didn't trust the leaders.
But Zinn also stresses that even with widespread lynchings, black communities kept organizing, kept resisting.
And there were strong dissenting voices too, right? Like John Hope challenging Washington's approach.
Exactly. Hope's call for equality, and W.E.B. Du Bois talking about the new capitalism and new enslavement of labor for both black and poor white people. It shows the complexity in the ongoing fight.
And Zinn connects this to labor struggles more broadly, showing it wasn't just about race. That quote from the unlettered mechanic in 1827, complaining that everyone focused on black slavery while white workers were suffering too.
Right. And later, like in Chicago in 1878, workers demanding control over their own labor, over production itself. The railroad strikes in 1877. brutal conditions, wage cuts, and violent responses when they protested.
There was that working men's party in Chicago calling for railroads to be nationalized.
Yeah, with figures like Albert Parsons. And the reaction was often incredibly violent suppression by authorities and militias. But they did lead a major rebellion in one city, St. Louis. It shows this powerful undercurrent of resistance against the economic system.
So pulling all these historical threads together, it really hammers home that history isn't some static thing we just learn.
Not at all. It's constantly being re-examined, reshaped by new finds, new perspectives, our own changing values.
Like how radiocarbon dating completely changed archaeological timelines for the Neolithic period, things like that.
Exactly. Or think about ongoing mysteries. Cleopatra's tomb, still missing, right? Despite so much searching. People online debate, was it looted? Did her enemies deny her a proper burial? We just don't know.
Unlike, say, Thutmose II's tomb, which was found, so it shows these things can surface.
Or Roanoke, the lost colony.
Yeah.
New finds on Hatteras Island suggest maybe they didn't just vanish. Maybe they integrated with the Croatoan tribe.
Which totally changes the classic story.
And even something relatively more recent, like the princes in the tower.
Yeah.
There's new evidence popping up, like a will mentioning Edward V's chain decades later. It keeps shifting the debate about Richard III.
It never seems to fully settle, and you see it all the time in archaeology. New tool sites, ancient DNA, lead pollution in ancient Greece, insights into societies maybe centered on women, Mesopotamian artifacts.
It's constant discovery. The past keeps giving up secrets.
So, yeah, whether it's a cold case or how we interpret, say, the American Revolution, our understanding is always evolving. New evidence, new tech, new ways of thinking. They can rewrite what we thought we knew.
Absolutely. So, wrapping it up, it's pretty clear that understanding the past isn't like reading a finished book. It's dynamic. It changes based on the tools we have and the questions we ask.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. If our grasp of the past is this changeable, how might people in the future look back on our time, on the events and shifts happening right now?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What parts of our current reality, things that seem obvious or settled to us now, might look totally different through a future lens? What stories might get overturned?
Keeps you curious, right? Makes you want to keep questioning. The story is definitely not over.